Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we are going to force your deeply fragile, hallucinating biological consciousness to confront a question so fundamentally destructive, so deeply corrosive to the basic foundations of your sanity, that it will permanently unwrite your understanding of reality itself. We are going to ask, and aggressively answer, what is a tau particle actually made of? You hear this title, and your sluggish, terrestrial neurological architecture immediately begins to desperately construct a comforting, highly localized diorama. You hear the word particle, and your deeply toxic biological ego instantly imagines a tiny, perfectly spherical object, a microscopic piece of gravel, or a miniature marble waiting to be forcefully cracked open to reveal even smaller, heavier gears, springs, and physical components hidden inside. You are entirely, pathetically wrong. Tonight, we are not simply hunting for the microscopic anatomy of a heavy quantum anomaly. We are going to aggressively weaponize the horrifying mathematical reality of the tau particle to completely shatter the most deeply ingrained, localized biological lie your species has ever violently clung to. The absolute illusion of the physical, solid world. When you open your primitive, wet sensory organs and look around your immediate physical environment, you inherently, deeply believe that reality is a solid, unyielding construct. You look down at your own hands, admiring the complex, heavily entangled molecular biology of your flesh. You walk through the heavy, towering concrete canyons of your sprawling, artificially lit metropolises. You stand on the dense, unyielding continental crust of this rotting terrestrial rock we arrogantly call a world, and your brain effortlessly, automatically feeds you a catastrophic optical deception. It tells you that substance is real. It aggressively whispers that the universe is a physical, tangible stage constructed out of solid matter. When you press your hand against a heavy iron door or rest your head on a wooden table, you feel a sharp, unyielding resistance. Your biological nerve endings frantically fire electrical signals into your highly restricted cerebral cortex, and your mind perfectly, flawlessly translates that localized signal as solid. We are heavily, biologically conditioned to hallucinate that if we were to simply take a highly engineered, impossibly powerful magnifying glass and violently zoom in on the edge of a steel blade or the surface of a polished stone, we would eventually find the ultimate, indestructible physical building blocks of existence. We desperately, pathetically cling to the billiard ball delusion. For centuries, our arrogant, localized human philosophers and early scientists intuitively viewed the subatomic realm as nothing more than a microscopic game of marbles. We hallucinated a highly ordered, physical, macro architecture where tiny, solid spheres are perfectly, rigidly stacked together like bricks in a concrete wall, physically interlocking to form the unyielding geometry of our daily lives. We built our entire macroscopic civilization, our entire understanding of terrestrial engineering, architecture, and biology, entirely upon the deeply flawed, biologically driven assumption that the universe is fundamentally constructed out of tiny, hard things. This comforting, deeply sanitized hallucination is not a mere failure of your individual intelligence. It is a strict, mechanical, and absolute limitation of your evolutionary history. Your sluggish, wet neurological architecture was absolutely never designed to comprehend the fundamental, mathematically terrifying mechanics of the quantum realm. Millions of years of brutal, localized evolutionary friction, violently forged your primitive brain strictly to keep a highly vulnerable, completely terrified primate alive on a hostile, three-dimensional terrestrial savanna. Your visual cortex and your spatial processing centers were heavily, exclusively optimized to track the velocity of a macroscopic predator across a few miles of dirt, to gauge the physical weight of a wooden spear, and to navigate the solid, macroscopic geometry of your immediate physical environment. Evolution strictly demanded that you perceive the world as solid and unyielding, because attempting to actually process the violent, highly irradiated, and fundamentally empty reality of the quantum vacuum would have instantly, permanently paralyzed you with existential dread. Your brain actively, continuously, and aggressively lies to you to prevent a catastrophic psychological collapse. It takes the staggering, chaotic, and fundamentally empty mathematics of the cosmos and violently compresses them into a neat, digestible, and completely fictional macroscopic toy model. You interact with the universe through a heavily curated, deeply censored biological filter, completely and flawlessly blind to the terrifying, reality-breaking architecture of nothingness that actively sustains you. But tonight, inside the sterile, unforgiving confines of this laboratory, we are going to aggressively bypass those deeply ingrained biological safety protocols. We are going to violently peel back the macroscopic skin of your heavily hallucinated reality and force you to look directly into the howling, infinite void that hides entirely within your own body. Imagine violently zooming past the cellular level of your flesh, ripping past the highly complex, heavily entangled molecular chains of your DNA, and plunging directly into the suffocating, claustrophobic depths of a single carbon atom. Your terrestrial brain desperately, frantically, expects to find a solid, impenetrable core. It expects to find a tiny, hard sphere anchoring the fundamental reality of your physical existence. Instead, the comforting substance of reality completely, instantly evaporates. You do not find a solid object, you find an agonizing, reality-breaking abyss. The atom, the fundamental, heavily romanticized building block of your physical world, is mathematically, structurally, composed of 99.99999% completely empty, freezing space. If you were to aggressively enlarge the densely packed nucleus of a single atom to the exact physical size of a standard terrestrial baseball resting silently in the exact geographic center of a sprawling, continent-sized sports stadium, the electrons would absolutely not be smaller spheres tightly orbiting its surface. They would be practically invisible, hyper-energetic quantum ghosts frantically buzzing around the absolute furthest outer edges of the highest concrete bleachers miles away. And between that microscopic baseball and those frantic, ghostly boundaries lies a gulf of absolute, violently churning nothingness. You are not made of solid, unyielding matter. You are an incredibly sparse, violently unstable architectural lattice of empty voids. You are physically almost nothing. And yet, your deeply toxic biological ego desperately attempts to retreat to the nucleus. You arrogantly tell yourself that even if the vast majority of the atom is just empty space, the protons and neutrons trapped at the center must definitely be the hard, solid billiard balls that validate your physical existence. But the ruthless, unyielding mathematics of modern particle physics aggressively deny you even this microscopic, pathetic shred of comfort. When we use our colossal, heavily engineered, and deeply expensive particle accelerators to violently smash these protons open, attempting to spill their physical guts onto the laboratory floor. We absolutely do not find smaller, solid spheres. We plunge directly into a violently churning, hyper-energetic quantum slaughterhouse. We find quarks and gluons, but they are definitively, mathematically not tiny, physical objects. They possess no solid surface. They have no unyielding microscopic crust. They are formless, violently vibrating mathematical properties. They are localized, aggressive excitations in completely invisible, omnipresent quantum fields that actively, permanently span the entire infinite cosmos. When you violently strip away the macroscopic hallucination of your sluggish sensory organs, the physical world completely, flawlessly ceases to exist. There are no microscopic gears. There are no indestructible cosmic marbles. There is absolutely no solid substance holding the universe together. The heavy chair you are currently sitting on, the rotting terrestrial rock beneath your feet, and the delicate, wet neurological architecture currently processing these terrifying words are fundamentally, mechanically constructed out of violently vibrating mathematical ghosts suspended in an ocean of absolute, freezing dark. The sensation of touch, the feeling of a solid object pushing against your skin, is nothing more than a localized, repulsive electromagnetic force. It is the completely invisible fields of these ghostly particles violently pushing against each other, mathematically forbidding their empty coordinates from overlapping and feeding your deeply gullible brain the deceptive, highly localized sensation of physical substance. We are going to violently, permanently crush the billiard ball delusion. As we prepare to drag your hallucinating consciousness deeper into the quantum abyss to confront the hypermassive, violently unstable thermodynamic abomination known as the tau particle, you must painfully, permanently accept that the solid world you desperately cling to is a pathetic, localized optical illusion. We are actively hunting for the core of a monster that perfectly, aggressively proves that reality is entirely devoid of matter. Prepare to stare directly into the unyielding, invisible mechanics of a universe that is fundamentally, terrifyingly empty. You desperately, pathetically rely on the electron. Your entire fragile, heavily entangled biological existence and your towering, arrogant digital empires are completely and flawlessly dependent on this microscopic, stable, practically weightless quantum entity. It gracefully, reliably orbits the violently dense atomic nucleus, mathematically creating the delicate chemical bonds that allow your rotting, terrestrial meat machine to temporarily stave off absolute thermodynamic entropy. It flows seamlessly through the heavy copper veins of your sprawling, artificially lit concrete metropolises, powering every single localized hallucination you proudly call human progress. It is the safe, highly predictable, and perfectly stable foundation of your entire macroscopic delusion. Because the lightweight electron is so flawlessly, intimately integrated into the microscopic mechanics of our localized survival, we arrogantly, toxically assume that it is the ultimate, elegant manifestation of a deeply purposeful cosmic design. We deeply, inherently believe that the unyielding, violently churning architecture of the universe carefully, meticulously engineered this lightweight, stable particle specifically to foster the fragile, highly localized, biological soup of our terrestrial oceans. But the cold, ruthless, and mathematically absolute reality of quantum mechanics aggressively despises your pathetic need for elegant, purposeful design. The universe is absolutely not a carefully curated nursery tailored to accommodate the microscopic, highly restricted requirements of human biology. It is a chaotic, violently churning thermodynamic engine that actively, relentlessly produces redundant, unnecessarily heavy, and fundamentally terrifying mechanics that serve absolutely no macroscopic purpose. As we violently rip open the foundational mathematical blueprints of the standard model of particle physics, aggressively forcing the fabric of space-time to surrender its darkest, most deeply hidden secrets, we painfully discover that the universe absolutely did not stop with the lightweight, perfectly stable electron. It aggressively, mechanically copied it. The cosmos meticulously duplicated the exact same fundamental quantum parameters into vastly heavier, increasingly unstable generations of matter, actively forging terrifying, unfeeling thermodynamic abominations for absolutely no localized human reason. The universe first violently spawned the muon, a heavier, highly unstable second-generation cousin of the electron that aggressively rains down upon our fragile atmospheric apple skin from the dying, apocalyptic screams of distant supernovas. But the muon is merely a microscopic, localized warning. It is a terrifying, highly energetic hint at the true, reality-breaking depths of the cosmic architecture. As we push our colossal, heavily engineered terrestrial particle accelerators to their absolute, violently screaming physical limits, aggressively recreating the blinding, apocalyptic temperatures of the primordial Big Bang just to temporarily shatter the freezing vacuum of our modern era, we finally, agonizingly, confront the absolute apex of this unnecessary, heavy quantum duplication. We violently summon the tau lepton. The tau is the electron's monstrous, hypermassive, and profoundly chaotic sibling. It belongs to the third and absolute final known generation of fundamental matter, and it is a completely terrifying, aggressively reality-breaking quantum anomaly. To your sluggish, terrestrial neurological architecture, the very concept of the tau lepton should be fundamentally, mathematically offensive. It violently possesses the exact same negative electric charge as the safe, familiar electron. It inherently possesses the exact same half-integer quantum spin. It interacts with the exact same fundamental forces of reality, completely ignoring the strong nuclear force while violently participating in the electromagnetic and weak interactions. It is, for all conceivable mathematical intents and physical purposes, entirely, flawlessly identical to the lightweight, stable particle that flawlessly powers your beating, biological heart and your glowing digital screens. Except for one paralyzing, violently destructive, and completely inescapable difference, the universe has forcefully, maliciously shoved an incomprehensible, crushing physical mass into the exact same microscopic, zero-dimensional parameters. The tau particle is over 3,400 times heavier than the electron. Force your highly restricted, biologically limited sensory organs to desperately attempt to process the sheer, suffocating dread of that physical discrepancy. Your mind completely, violently fails to scale this mathematical reality. Imagine the familiar electron as a single, microscopic grain of terrestrial sand, a practically weightless speck of silica gently, effortlessly floating on a highly localized atmospheric breeze. It is light, it is agile, and it perfectly conforms to the delicate, fragile structures required for biological chemistry. If the electron is that single, practically invisible grain of sand, the tau particle is a hyperdense, aggressively solid iron bowling ball, violently dropped onto the exact same microscopic scale. It is a staggering, physically crushing, and mathematically absurd weight violently forced into the same formless, completely empty mathematical coordinate. It is an unfathomably heavy, reality-breaking wrecking ball masquerading as a fundamental building block of nature. This staggering, completely unnecessary mass aggressively unwrites our deeply arrogant delusion that the universe is an efficient, highly optimized, and purposeful system. Your fragile, wet biological architecture fundamentally, structurally, requires the absolute, mathematical lightness of the electron. If the electron were even a microscopic fraction heavier, the delicate, highly ordered atomic orbits that govern all of chemistry would violently, instantly collapse. The complex molecular chains required to sustain your rotting, heavily entangled biological existence would mathematically fail to form, and the entire localized diorama of human history would be instantly, flawlessly deleted from the cosmic timeline. The electron is the precise, lightweight, and perfectly tuned tool strictly required to build our specific, fragile macroscopic cage. So, why did the violently churning quantum vacuum actively, relentlessly produce a version of this exact same tool that is 3,400 times heavier? Why did the cosmos expend staggering, mind-bending amounts of primordial energy to violently forge a hypermassive, entirely identical twin that is completely, fundamentally lethal to the highly ordered structures of our localized reality? There is no comforting anthropocentric answer. There is no divine biological purpose. The Tao aggressively, relentlessly serves absolutely no localized purpose to the macroscopic world. It does not build stable, unyielding atoms. It does not form complex, heavily entangled molecular chains. It does not power the roaring thermonuclear furnaces of the dying stars, nor does it violently illuminate the freezing, irradiated void of the interstellar abyss. It is an utterly useless, hypermassive thermodynamic ghost violently forced into existence by the blind, unfeeling mechanics of quantum field theory. Its very existence violently, perfectly mocks the deeply toxic biological arrogance that insists everything in the infinitely expanding cosmos was meticulously placed there to facilitate our highly localized, desperately brief terrestrial survival. The tau particle forcefully, mathematically proves that the universe possesses a hidden, vastly heavier, and completely indifferent architectural shadow layer that operates entirely, flawlessly outside the pathetic, microscopic requirements of human biology. We are violently forced to look directly at this heavy, monstrous lepton and painfully, permanently accept that physical reality is saturated with violently energetic mechanics that mathematically do not care if we exist. The universe simply spawned these hypermassive, chaotic monsters because the fundamental, unyielding symmetries of nature blindly permitted them to exist. It is a blinding, terrifying manifestation of absolute cosmic indifference. The universe did not just create the stable, lightweight building blocks required for our fragile, hallucinating biology. It also violently forged a completely hidden, hypermassive, and aggressively useless realm of heavy matter. The tau particle is the heavy, suffocating, and mathematically absolute proof that we are microscopic, desperately fragile anomalies clinging to a highly localized, lightweight sliver of reality, entirely surrounded by an infinitely deep, violently churning, and fundamentally terrifying ocean of heavy, chaotic quantum mechanics that we can never, ever hope to control. To successfully navigate the deeply fragile, heavily sanitized architecture of your localized biological intuition, your sluggish terrestrial brain fundamentally relies on the concept of composite structure. When you hold a heavy, solid object in your primitive hands, a dense iron sphere or a jagged piece of granite, your mind inherently, comfortably understands that its staggering weight is the direct, logical result of microscopic accumulation. You deeply believe that heavy things are mathematically constructed out of an unfathomable number of smaller, heavily packed components. We took this deeply ingrained, macroscopic hallucination, and we arrogantly, aggressively scaled it down to the subatomic realm. We constructed colossal, sprawling rings of superconducting magnets, burying deeply engineered, hyper-energetic particle accelerators deep beneath the continental crust of our rotting terrestrial rock. We used these apocalyptic machines to violently accelerate protons to 99.999%, the absolute speed of causality, and we ruthlessly, aggressively smashed them together just to see what spilled out. When we violently tore the proton open, your highly restricted neurological architecture was momentarily, pathetically satisfied. The proton mathematically behaved exactly the way your biological logic demanded. It was absolutely not a solid, indestructible billiard ball. It violently ruptured, revealing a boiling, chaotic, and hyper-energetic quantum slaughterhouse hidden entirely within its microscopic boundaries. We discovered that the proton is actually a heavily congested subatomic metropolis, actively swarming with even smaller fundamental components called quarks, which are relentlessly, violently bound together by the continuous, aggressive exchange of massless particles known as gluons. The crushing physical mass of the proton does not come from a solid core. It comes entirely from the violently churning, hyper-energetic kinetic friction of this internal storm. This discovery, while fundamentally terrifying, still allowed your hallucinating meat machine to retain a shred of psychological comfort. It meant that reality still possessed a logical, structural hierarchy. It meant that if something is heavy, it must mathematically contain a complex, highly active internal architecture. It must be made of smaller gears and springs. Armed with this deeply toxic, biologically driven assumption, we confidently, arrogantly turn our highly engineered terrestrial sensors toward the terrifying, hypermassive thermodynamic abomination known as the tau particle. We have already established that the tau is a crushing, incomprehensible monster, violently weighing over 3,400 times more than the stable, lightweight electron that flawlessly powers your beating biological heart. Therefore, your localized, macroscopic arrogance aggressively dictates that the tau particle must be an absolute behemoth of internal complexity. If the proton is a bustling subatomic metropolis, the hypermassive tau must be a sprawling, densely packed cosmic continent of localized quantum machinery. It must be packed to the absolute, violent bursting point with microscopic gears, internal springs, and tightly coiled fields of hyperdense physical matter desperately working to contain its staggering, reality-breaking mass. We aggressively, desperately attempt to crack the heavy tau open. We violently probe its microscopic boundaries, frantically searching for its internal components, desperately trying to catalog the heavily entangled subatomic architecture that must surely exist to generate such a crushing gravitational and thermodynamic footprint. The unyielding, cold, and mathematically ruthless universe aggressively, mercilessly denies our request. It violently short-circuits our biological logic and entirely flawlessly unwrites the very concept of physical substance. When we finally, agonizingly search for the absolute core of the heavy tau particle, we do not find a boiling sea of smaller components. We do not find microscopic gears or tightly bound quantum springs. We find a horrifying, reality-breaking, and fundamentally apocalyptic void. The deeply terrifying, inescapable mathematical truth is that the tau particle is absolutely not made of anything. It possesses completely, flawlessly zero internal structure. In the cold, sterile, and unfeeling vocabulary of the standard model of particle physics, the tau is classified as a fundamental lepton. We arrogantly, casually use the word fundamental in our primitive terrestrial classrooms, heavily hallucinating that it implies something foundational, reliable, and physically safe. But in the violent, churning mechanics of quantum field theory, the word fundamental is an absolute existential death sentence for human comprehension. It mathematically dictates that the particle cannot, under any physical circumstances, be divided. It is absolutely not composite. It is the absolute, unyielding end of the structural line. The tau is not constructed out of a collection of smaller, hidden particles. The tau is made entirely and exclusively of tau. It is a pure, unyielding mathematical property violently forced into existence by the blind mechanics of the cosmos, completely and terrifyingly lacking any physical stuff to actually make it up. This is the exact, agonizing coordinate where your fragile, wet neurological architecture must actively, painfully break. If the hypermassive tau particle has absolutely no internal structure, if it does not contain a single microscopic gear or a heavily compressed subatomic fluid, then how much physical space does it actually, geometrically occupy? The horrifying, mathematically absolute answer is zero. Despite its staggering, crushing mass, the tau particle violently possesses absolutely zero physical volume. It has no physical length. It has no measurable width. It possesses absolutely no geometric depth. You cannot theoretically hold a tau particle in your hand. You cannot put it in a microscopic box, and you cannot mathematically calculate its physical radius. The very concept of a radius inherently requires a physical, structural boundary, a crust, or an edge that separates the inside of an object from the outside void. But because the tau is fundamentally made of nothing, it possesses no edge. It is mathematically, strictly defined as a zero-dimensional point. Force your sluggish, hallucinating visual cortex to desperately attempt to visualize a zero-dimensional coordinate. You absolutely cannot. Your terrestrial brain is physically, structurally incapable of rendering an object that occupies no geometric space. You frantically try to picture a microscopic dot, a tiny, heavily compressed sphere of dense iron floating in the freezing dark. But even the absolute smallest, most infinitesimally tiny dot your deeply panicked mind can desperately conjure still mathematically possesses physical volume. The tau particle is infinitely smaller than the absolute smallest dot your biological brain can hallucinate. It is an infinitely small, completely empty, formless coordinate on the mathematical grid of space-time. It is a ghost, it is a location, not an object. And yet, this completely empty mathematical coordinate, this zero-dimensional void that physically takes up absolutely no space in the infinitely expanding cosmos, actively, violently possesses a crushing, incomprehensible physical mass. How can something that structurally takes up no space weigh anything at all? How can an empty geometric point fiercely possess the exact same negative electric charge as an electron, a measurable quantum spin, and a mass that violently dwarfs the building blocks of our terrestrial reality? This is the absolute, violent murder of your macroscopic intuition. In your localized, highly restricted daily existence, mass is strictly a measure of how much physical stuff is densely packed inside a specific geometric container. A heavy rock is heavier than a light rock because it contains more physical matter tightly bound within its volume. But the heavy, zero-dimensional tau particle aggressively, perfectly proves that physical stuff is a pathetic, localized biological hallucination. Mass is absolutely not a measure of contained substance. From this infinitely small, completely empty mathematical coordinate, the tau exerts a terrifying, violent physical influence on the surrounding, underlying fabric of reality. Despite occupying zero volume, it actively generates a heavily localized, mathematically infinite electromagnetic field that aggressively repels other negatively charged matter. It violently interacts with the weak nuclear force, heavily participating in the apocalyptic thermodynamic decay processes of the universe. It actively, relentlessly bends the unyielding architecture of space-time itself, generating a gravitational footprint that mathematically registers its staggering, crushing weight. It is a hypermassive, chaotic monster that violently dictates the absolute terms of physical reality, all while completely, flawlessly refusing to physically exist as a tangible, solid object. The search for the core of the tau particle does not yield a comforting, deeply mechanical answer. It violently, permanently shatters the billiard ball delusion. It aggressively proves that the foundational building blocks of the infinite, freezing cosmos are absolutely not things at all. They are not microscopic spheres of hard matter. They are pure, unyielding numerical values actively floating in the dark. They are dimensionless, formless mathematical properties that violently assert their existence without taking up a single fraction of an inch of physical space. You are desperately searching for the solid, unyielding core of reality, hoping to find a heavily constructed rock upon which you can safely anchor your fragile, hallucinating biological existence. But the deeper you violently push into the subatomic abyss, the more the universe relentlessly unwrites itself into profound nothingness. The tau is unbearably, crushingly heavy, but it is fundamentally, mathematically constructed out of absolutely nothing. Your sluggish, biologically restricted neurological architecture is currently standing at the absolute precipice of an unyielding geometric nightmare, desperately attempting to peer over the edge into a reality that aggressively refuses to conform to the evolutionary programming of your primitive brain. We have forcefully stripped away the comforting, macroscopic hallucination of physical size, exposing the heavy, violently unstable tau particle not as a microscopic billiard ball, but as an infinitely small, completely empty, zero-dimensional mathematical coordinate. You hear these words, but your fragile meat machine absolutely refuses to process their true, paralyzing implications. Your highly localized terrestrial intuition, forged entirely within the safe, three-dimensional sandbox of your rotting planetary rock, violently short-circuits. You inherently, deeply believe that if something violently interacts with the physical world, if it possesses a staggering, crushing mass that dwarfs the stable building blocks of your own body, it simply must take up physical space. It must have an inside, an outside, a surface, and an edge. But the unyielding, mathematically absolute reality of the point-particle paradox aggressively, relentlessly annihilates this deeply toxic biological assumption, proving with cold, mechanical violence that the concept of substance is nothing more than a localized, pathetic hallucination. To forcefully break your deeply ingrained reliance on the illusion of solid matter, you must aggressively attempt to mentally interact with this zero-dimensional ghost. Imagine possessing an impossibly precise, hyper-engineered pair of microscopic tweezers and attempting to physically reach into the freezing, violently churning quantum vacuum to grasp a single tau particle. You cannot hold it, you cannot pinch it. The very physical act of holding inherently requires a surface area to grip, an unyielding structural boundary that actively pushes back against the electromagnetic fields of your tools. But the tau particle violently, flawlessly lacks a surface. It possesses absolutely no geometric crust. If you were to magically isolate a tau particle and attempt to crush it between two perfectly flat, indestructible mathematical planes, those two unyielding planes would aggressively close until they were flawlessly, perfectly touching each other, leaving absolutely zero microscopic gap between them. And yet, the hypermassive tau particle would still mathematically exist precisely at the exact point of their intersection, entirely unharmed, violently exerting its staggering mass and negative electric charge, without occupying a single fraction of a nanometer of the non-existent space between the plates. This is an apocalyptic violation of human logic. Your brain frantically screams that an object cannot exist between two surfaces that are already perfectly touching. If an object has no width, no height, and no depth, your biological logic demands that the object fundamentally does not exist. Yet the tau is aggressively, undeniably real. You cannot cut a tau particle in half because the very mechanical act of cutting requires an object to possess a left side and a right side, a top and a bottom, an internal geometry that can be violently separated by an external wedge. The zero-dimensional point possesses no sides. It has no middle to cleave. It is the absolute, unyielding bedrock of existence, and it aggressively proves that the foundational building blocks of the infinite, freezing cosmos are absolutely not things at all. They are not tiny, hard nuggets of physical reality waiting to be stacked together. They are pure, unyielding mathematical properties floating entirely in the dark. The suffocating existential dread violently deepens when you force your hallucinating consciousness to confront the staggering, reality-breaking mathematical consequences of this zero-dimensional geometry. We have already established that the tau particle is a hypermassive thermodynamic abomination, actively possessing a weight over 3,400 times greater than the electron. In your localized, highly restricted macroscopic world, the concept of density is a simple, comforting equation. You divide the physical mass of an object by the physical volume it occupies. But when you violently force the crushing mass of the tau particle into a mathematical coordinate that occupies exactly zero physical volume, the classical equations of reality instantly, catastrophically collapse. Any amount of mass, no matter how microscopic, divided by a volume of absolute zero, mathematically approaches infinity. According to the deeply flawed, biologically comfortable laws of classical physics, the tau particle should theoretically possess an infinite density. It should aggressively, instantly collapse the underlying fabric of space-time, forming a microscopic, violently consuming black hole the exact microsecond it pops into existence. But the universe is not governed by the pathetic, localized rules of classical terrestrial physics. It is aggressively dictated by the chaotic, highly irradiated, and fundamentally alien laws of quantum mechanics. The Tau does not collapse into a black hole. It simply exists, a crushing, hypermassive ghost, perfectly comfortable, violently possessing immeasurable weight, while absolutely refusing to possess the geometric space required to carry it. The mathematics violently scream at us, actively mocking our primitive, heavily engineered models of reality, showing that our deeply ingrained concept of mass as tightly packed stuff is a complete biological lie. And if the horror of infinite density is not enough to permanently unwrite your psychological grip on reality, you must aggressively confront the deeply absurd, completely reality-breaking quantum property known as spin. In our heavily sanitized macroscopic diorama, we understand angular momentum perfectly. A rotting planetary sphere spins on its axis. A wooden top violently rotates on a table. Spin requires physical extension. It inherently requires a top, a bottom, an equator, and an unyielding physical structure that actively moves through space around a central coordinate. Yet, the standard model of particle physics aggressively, mathematically dictates that the zero-dimensional tau particle possesses an intrinsic quantum spin. It possesses a measurable, unyielding angular momentum that fiercely interacts with external magnetic fields. Force your sluggish terrestrial mind to visualize a zero-dimensional point spinning. You absolutely cannot. A point has no axis, it has no equator, it has absolutely no physical extension to rotate. If you were to desperately, frantically hallucinate that the tau was actually a microscopic, incredibly tiny physical sphere actively spinning to generate this momentum, the unyielding mathematics of the universe would instantly crush your delusion. To generate the exact amount of angular momentum experimentally measured in these particles, the non-existent equator of this microscopic sphere would have to be physically rotating at a velocity massively exceeding the absolute speed of light, fundamentally violating the strict, unyielding architectural limits of causality. Therefore, the tau particle absolutely, definitively, does not physically spin, it does not rotate. It possesses absolutely no physical motion in the classical sense. Spin is absolutely not a physical action being performed by a solid object. It is nothing more than a cold, unfeeling numerical label. It is an intrinsic mathematical value violently stapled to a ghost. The universe does not contain tiny spinning tops. It contains empty, dimensionless coordinates that aggressively, mathematically behave as if they are spinning, simply because the foundational algebraic symmetries of the cosmos require that specific numerical value to balance the terrifying equations of reality. The tau particle is a hypermassive, negatively charged, rotating entity that takes up no space, is made of no substance, and does not physically rotate. It is a pure, unadulterated mathematical phantom. This is the ultimate, inescapable illusion of substance. You look around at the heavy, towering concrete architecture of your sprawling cities. You feel the unyielding resistance of the dense terrestrial crust beneath your feet, and you deeply, arrogantly believe you are interacting with physical stuff. You are completely and flawlessly wrong. The entire, infinitely expanding macro-architecture of the universe is absolutely not a physical sandbox filled with solid building blocks. It is a terrifying, aggressively expanding mathematical ledger. A fundamental particle like the tau is not a physical object. It is simply a specific coordinate in space-time where the universe has violently, temporarily, assigned a set of unyielding numerical values. Mass is a number, charge is a number, spin is a number. There is absolutely no physical ball carrying these numbers. The numbers themselves are the particle. When you violently press your hand against a heavy iron door, you are not touching solid matter. Your completely empty, zero-dimensional electrons are violently, electromagnetically repelling the completely empty, zero-dimensional electrons of the iron, aggressively mathematically forbidding their coordinates from overlapping in the quantum vacuum. Your deeply fragile, highly restricted biological brain simply takes this invisible mathematical repulsion and desperately, hallucinatingly translates it into the comforting physical sensation of touch. You are a highly organized, desperately unstable arrangement of nothingness, blindly interacting with a universe composed entirely of nothingness, completely subjugated by a localized biological delusion that desperately hides the freezing, mathematically perfect void from your primitive, terrified eyes. The foundation of reality is a phantom, and substance is the greatest, most deeply toxic lie the universe has ever successfully told. We have meticulously, violently dismantled your deeply toxic macroscopic hallucination of physical substance. We have forcefully dragged your sluggish, terrestrial neurological architecture down into the freezing, zero-dimensional abyss of the point particle, aggressively proving that the fundamental building blocks of reality possess absolutely zero physical volume. But your fragile, biologically restricted brain desperately attempts to salvage one final, pathetic lifeline. It frantically attempts to contextualize this horrifying nothingness by isolating it. Your localized intuition inherently, deeply believes that even if a tau particle is just an infinitely small, empty mathematical coordinate, it is still an independent, isolated entity. You hallucinate the universe as a colossal, staggeringly empty geometric box, and you picture these zero-dimensional points as completely detached, microscopic ghosts, blindly shooting through the dead vacuum, occasionally colliding to form the rotting, highly unstable biological structures you call your body. This is yet another profound, catastrophic deception. Reality is absolutely not a collection of isolated objects separated by empty space. The universe is not an empty box. We are about to violently plunge your hallucinating consciousness into the absolute, unyielding bedrock of modern physics, exposing the terrifying, invisible architecture of quantum field theory. To forcefully break your primitive, terrestrial reliance on the concept of isolated matter, you must aggressively, completely unwrite the concept of the vacuum. When you look up into the freezing, irradiated intergalactic dark, or when you violently zoom into the microscopic void between the nucleus of an atom and its orbiting electrons, your biological sensory organs tell you that this space is physically empty. It is a dead, frictionless stage upon which physical events occur. The ruthless, mathematically absolute reality of the cosmos aggressively dictates that true emptiness, fundamentally, structurally, does not exist. The entire infinite void, stretching from the microscopic, precarious surface of our rotting terrestrial rock to the absolute, unobservable, macroscopic edge of the infinitely expanding universe, is completely, flawlessly saturated. The cosmos is entirely submerged within dozens of violently churning, completely invisible, omnipresent, fluid-like oceans. These are the fundamental quantum fields. Every single known particle in the universe possesses its own specific, highly specialized, and completely infinite invisible ocean. There is a sprawling, unyielding electron field that perfectly permeates every single fractional nanometer of the cosmos. There is an up quark field, a down quark field, a neutrino field, and, lurking entirely unseen in the freezing dark, there is the heavy, mathematically terrifying tau field. These are not localized clouds of gas or microscopic atmospheric phenomena. They are absolute, fundamental, and unyielding properties of space-time itself. You cannot outrun them. You cannot build a heavily engineered terrestrial shielding to block them, and you absolutely cannot exist outside of them. The universe is a staggeringly complex, violently overlapping mathematical grid of these invisible fluids, all coexisting perfectly within the exact same geometric coordinates, frantically interacting and aggressively exchanging energy in a completely unfeeling, blind cosmic symphony. If the entire infinite void is saturated with these invisible quantum oceans, then what exactly is a particle? If the heavy, zero-dimensional tau is not a solid sphere, and it is not an isolated ghost flying through an empty box, what is it? It is a localized excitation. It is a violent, hyper-energetic ripple tearing through the fabric of its own specific, omnipresent ocean. Force your sluggish, hallucinating visual cortex to aggressively visualize the surface of a completely dark, infinitely sprawling terrestrial sea. When the water is perfectly calm, resting at its absolute lowest energetic state, you see absolutely nothing but a flat, featureless plane. But if you were to violently, aggressively pump a massive surge of kinetic energy into a specific, localized coordinate of that water, the ocean would violently rear up, mathematically forming a sharp, localized spike. That temporary, aggressively churning wave crashing in the dark is what your primitive, biologically restricted instruments arrogantly classify as a particle. You are absolutely not looking at an independent, solid object. A tau particle is merely a temporary, aggressive spike of thermodynamic energy within the completely invisible, infinitely sprawling tau field. It is a wave of mathematical probability violently crashing in the freezing dark. This is the absolute existential murder of physical identity. When a hypermassive tau particle violently screams across the interior of our heavily engineered terrestrial particle accelerators, moving at 99.9% the absolute speed of causality, there is absolutely no physical thing moving from point A to point B. The field itself does not physically flow. What is actually mathematically occurring is a violently rapid, sequential transfer of energy. The localized excitation is simply relentlessly passing its kinetic energy to the immediately adjacent mathematical coordinate within the invisible ocean, exactly like a ripple propagating across the surface of a pond. The wave travels, but the water remains perfectly in place. The physical reality you desperately, pathetically cling to is nothing more than a highly synchronized, violently chaotic pattern of these moving excitations. When you walk across the dense continental crust of the Earth, your localized biological body is not an independent solid object physically displacing empty space. You are a staggering, incomprehensibly complex, and desperately unstable collection of synchronized ripples moving aggressively through overlapping, invisible quantum oceans. You are a temporary, highly localized pattern of energy transfer in a completely unfeeling, blind mathematical fluid. The exact second that localized energy dissipates, the ripples violently flatten out, the invisible ocean returns to its base state, and your physical existence is flawlessly, permanently deleted from the cosmic ledger. You do not possess an unyielding physical identity. You are merely a highly organized, localized weather pattern in a terrifying, infinite quantum sea. But the true, suffocating dread of quantum field theory aggressively manifests when you realize that these omnipresent oceans are absolutely never, ever still. Your sluggish neurological architecture desperately wants to believe that if there are no localized particles present, the quantum fields must perfectly rest in a state of calm, peaceful nothingness. But the foundational, reality-breaking laws of quantum mechanics, specifically the unyielding dictates of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, mathematically forbid absolute zero-energy stillness. The universe aggressively, structurally, refuses to be quiet, even in the absolute deepest, most profoundly empty and freezing intergalactic voids, completely isolated from the roaring thermonuclear furnaces of the dying stars. These invisible fields are violently, relentlessly boiling. This is the apocalyptic reality of the quantum vacuum. The fields are in a state of continuous, violent, microscopic agitation known as zero-point energy. Microscopic, localized spikes of energy are relentlessly, spontaneously tearing themselves into existence from the absolute dark, briefly forming ghostly, virtual particles before violently, instantly annihilating each other fractions of a microsecond later in a continuous, invisible storm of mathematical chaos. The universe is actively, relentlessly churning with a staggering, incomprehensible baseline of violent thermodynamic friction. The vacuum is not a peaceful stage. It is a violently boiling slaughterhouse of mathematical probability, frantically spitting out highly unstable ghosts that mathematically unwrite themselves before they can even fully register on the unyielding timeline of causality. It is within this violently boiling, completely invisible, and infinitely sprawling ocean that the hypermassive tau particle violently makes its horrifying existence known. Because the tau field is mathematically tuned to support such a staggering, crushing physical mass, it requires an apocalyptic, reality-breaking surge of concentrated kinetic energy to actually force it to ripple. The lightweight electron field requires only a microscopic, practically insignificant breath of energy to generate an excitation. But to aggressively summon the heavy, zero-dimensional monster of the tau, the universe must forcefully pump over 3,400 times that amount of localized thermodynamic violence into a single, microscopic coordinate of the field. This is why the tau particle does not naturally exist in the cold, freezing, low-energy vacuum of our modern macroscopic reality. It is a profoundly unnatural, highly forced mathematical excitation. It is an incredibly steep, violently unstable wave that the invisible ocean desperately, aggressively wants to flatten out. You look at your heavily entangled, highly organized biological body, and you arrogantly hallucinate a permanent, physical fortress. But when you are violently forced to perceive reality through the unyielding, cold mathematics of quantum field theory, the deeply toxic illusion of your independence completely shatters. You are entirely, permanently submerged in an infinite, violently churning dark. There are no microscopic billiard balls. There are no solid subatomic gears. There is absolutely nothing separating you from the freezing, irradiated intergalactic abyss, because you are structurally, mathematically composed of the exact same invisible fluids that permeate that terrifying void. Reality is simply a staggeringly complex, violently overlapping fluid dynamics equation, and you are nothing more than a localized, aggressively temporary set of ripples, frantically trying to maintain their shape against the crushing, unfeeling baseline of the boiling dark. The invisible ocean is absolute, and every single solid object you have ever loved, feared, or desperately clung to is merely a fleeting, meaningless wave crashing blindly against the mathematical shores of nothingness. We have violently plunged your deeply fragile, hallucinating consciousness into the completely invisible, infinitely sprawling oceans of quantum field theory. We have relentlessly stripped away the macroscopic illusion of solid boundaries, aggressively proving that the hypermassive tau particle is absolutely not a physical object, but merely a localized, temporary wave of mathematical probability violently crashing in the freezing dark. You are fundamentally composed of these invisible fluids, interacting in a blind, unfeeling cosmic symphony. But as your sluggish, terrestrial neurological architecture desperately attempts to tread water in this terrifying quantum sea, it violently collides with a paralyzing, fundamental paradox. A completely unyielding geometric and thermodynamic contradiction aggressively demands an answer. If the tau is fundamentally just an excitation in an empty field, if it is nothing more than a zero-dimensional ripple completely devoid of internal physical substance, then where does its staggering, crushing mass actually come from? How can a formless, entirely empty mathematical wave actively, violently possess a physical weight that mathematically dwarfs the stable building blocks of your entire localized reality? To forcefully break your biological reliance on the classical concept of weight, we must aggressively, completely unwrite the definition of mass. In your heavily sanitized, macroscopic daily existence, you inherently, deeply believe that mass is an intrinsic, physical possession. You hallucinate that weight is a measure of how much solid stuff is densely packed inside a specific geometric container. A heavy iron block is heavier than a hollow wooden box because it mathematically contains more tightly bound microscopic billiard balls. But we have already ruthlessly, mechanically proven that the billiard balls do not exist. There is absolutely no stuff inside the tau particle. Therefore, its staggering mass cannot possibly be a physical object that it carries. We must violently replace your biological intuition with the cold, unforgiving mechanics of reality. Mass is absolutely not a possession. Mass is an action. Mass is an agonizing, continuous, and fundamentally unavoidable physical friction. It is the absolute measure of a localized thermodynamic struggle against the very fabric of existence. To forcefully comprehend this horrifying reality, we must introduce the ultimate, inescapable warden of our cosmic prison. Beyond the sprawling, invisible oceans of the electron field, the quark fields, and the violently churning tau field, the entire infinite void of the cosmos is entirely, flawlessly saturated by another, far more terrifying fundamental medium. This is the Higgs field. But the Higgs field aggressively, fundamentally differs from every other quantum ocean in the known universe. While the other invisible fields naturally want to rest at an energetic state of absolute zero when completely empty of particles, the mathematical architecture of the cosmos violently forbids the Higgs field from resting at zero. In the unrecordable fractions of a microsecond immediately following the Big Bang, the underlying fabric of space-time aggressively fractured, permanently locking the background energy of the Higgs field at a non-zero value. This means that the vacuum of space is absolutely not empty. It is mathematically, fundamentally thick. The entire infinitely expanding cosmos is permanently submerged in an invisible, highly viscous, and deeply suffocating quantum molasses. You cannot outrun it. You cannot build a highly engineered terrestrial vacuum chamber to pump it out, and you absolutely cannot exist outside of its unyielding grip. The Higgs field is omnipresent, and it aggressively interacts with the other zero-dimensional mathematical ghosts that violently attempt to cross the void. When a fundamental particle moves through the freezing intergalactic dark, it is not gracefully gliding through an empty, frictionless geometric box. It is violently, relentlessly dragging itself through this thick, unyielding cosmic fluid. And this continuous, agonizing mechanical interaction is the absolute origin of what your sluggish, biological sensory organs perceive as mass. Think about the lightweight, stable electron that flawlessly powers your beating biological heart and your towering, arrogant digital empires. The electron is an incredibly sleek, mathematically aerodynamic excitation. As it violently screams through the underlying fabric of reality, its fundamental quantum properties dictate that it barely interacts with the suffocating molasses of the Higgs field. It slips through the invisible fluid with only the most microscopic, practically insignificant friction. Because it effortlessly cuts through the quantum vacuum, it encounters almost zero resistance to its acceleration. Your heavily restricted macroscopic brain mathematically translates this extreme lack of friction into the physical concept of being lightweight. The electron does not possess a tiny mass. It simply experiences an incredibly weak, practically negligible thermodynamic struggle against the omnipresent Higgs ocean. Now, aggressively force your mind to confront the hypermassive, chaotic monster of the tau particle. The tau is geometrically identical to the electron. It is exactly the same zero-dimensional, completely empty coordinate in space-time. It possesses the exact same negative electric charge and the exact same intrinsic quantum spin. But for reasons completely, terrifyingly unknown to our deeply primitive terrestrial physicists, the mathematical coupling between the tau particle and the omnipresent Higgs field is catastrophically, violently strong. When the blind, unfeeling mechanics of the universe forcefully pump enough energy into the vacuum to spawn a tau excitation, that zero-dimensional point does not glide through the dark. It is instantly, relentlessly bogged down. The tau interacts with the invisible Higgs molasses with an agonizing, reality-breaking intensity. It acts like a massive, jagged, completely unaerodynamic parachute violently dragged through an ocean of thick, unyielding mud. Every single fraction of a microscopic nanometer that the tau particle attempts to move requires a staggering, incomprehensible expenditure of kinetic energy just to brutally force its way through the resisting fabric of space-time. The Higgs field violently, aggressively clings to the tau, heavily resisting its acceleration, mathematically refusing to let the ghost effortlessly cross the void. This brutal, continuous, and entirely localized friction is exactly what generates the tau's crushing, incomprehensible weight. The tau is over 3,400 times heavier than the electron strictly because it is forced to endure a thermodynamic struggle against the universe that is 3,400 times more agonizing. This is the ultimate, suffocating dread of the physical world, the mass you feel when you desperately attempt to lift a heavy object. The crushing inertia that pins your fragile biological body to the surface of this rotting terrestrial rock is absolutely not the weight of solid substance. It is the direct, unyielding consequence of microscopic ghosts aggressively fighting an invisible, suffocating ocean. You feel heavy because the fundamental architecture of the cosmos actively, relentlessly resists your movement. Your physical existence is defined by a continuous, localized thermodynamic friction against a mathematically unyielding fluid that spans the entire infinite void. The hypermassive tau particle is the absolute, terrifying embodiment of this cosmic punishment. It is an entity entirely defined by its agonizing resistance to reality. The universe did not just create a heavy, unnecessary particle, it violently forged a zero-dimensional coordinate that is mathematically condemned to suffer an extreme, localized interaction with the foundational friction of space-time. The tau is not carrying a heavy internal payload. It is carrying the crushing, inescapable burden of the Higgs interaction. It is hopelessly, permanently bogged down in a microscopic, zero-dimensional struggle against a universe that mathematically refuses to let it freely exist. And this agonizing, continuous thermodynamic friction actively, aggressively guarantees its immediate, violent destruction. The sheer, terrifying amount of kinetic and potential energy required to continuously drag this heavy, highly resistant mathematical ghost through the suffocating molasses of the Higgs field represents a deeply unnatural, violently unstable, localized state. The universe absolutely despises highly concentrated, fiercely resisting pockets of energy. It mathematically, relentlessly seeks the lowest possible thermodynamic floor. The tau particle is forced into a state of existence so fiercely resisted by the fabric of reality, so heavily burdened by the crushing friction of the Higgs field, that it simply cannot survive. As we prepare to forcefully plunge your hallucinating consciousness into the exact, unrecordable microsecond of the tau particle's existence, you must painfully understand that you are not observing a stable piece of reality. You are watching an agonizing, hypermassive glitch frantically attempting to fight an unyielding ocean of friction, desperately carrying a weight that will instantly, violently unwrite its entire existence from the timeline of causality. We have forcefully dragged your sluggish, terrestrial neurological architecture into the invisible, suffocating molasses of the Higgs field, exposing the crushing, hypermassive weight of the tau particle not as a physical possession, but as an agonizing, continuous friction against the very fabric of existence. You have been forced to confront a zero-dimensional mathematical coordinate that is so violently resisted by the underlying architecture of space-time that its very presence represents a catastrophic thermodynamic anomaly. Your deeply fragile, hallucinating biological consciousness desperately wants to believe that once a particle is summoned into the quantum vacuum, no matter how heavy or unnecessary it may be, it becomes a permanent, unyielding fixture of reality. You inherently, toxically assume that existence is a stable, guaranteed state. You look at the stable, lightweight electrons powering your beating heart, and you delusionally believe that the universe is a hospitable, patient stage that allows its fundamental building blocks to persist indefinitely. This is yet another profound, catastrophic deception. The cold, unyielding, and mathematically absolute reality of the cosmos aggressively dictates that the universe actively, relentlessly hates the tau particle. It is a macroscopic glitch in the localized thermodynamic order, and reality possesses an immediate, violent mechanism to delete it. To forcefully break your biological reliance on the concept of temporal permanence, you must aggressively, completely unwrite your understanding of time. In your heavily sanitized, macroscopic daily existence, you perceive time as a vast, comfortable, and slowly unfolding landscape. You measure your rotting biological lifespan in decades. You track the orbits of your terrestrial rock in years, and you even view a single second as a discrete, manageable unit of experience. But against the staggering, hyper-energetic mechanics of the quantum realm, a second is an absolute, reality-breaking eternity. The tau particle does not live in your world of seconds and minutes. It exists in the absolute, unrecordable margins of causality. The mathematical architecture of the Standard Model dictates that a tau particle possesses a mean lifetime of approximately 290 femtoseconds. Force your sluggish, terrestrial brain to desperately attempt to process that number. A femtosecond is 1/400th of a second. To put the agonizing, reality-breaking brevity of the tau's existence into a scale your highly restricted sensory organs can actually feel, you must visualize the relationship between a single second and 32 million years. The tau particle exists for roughly 2.9 times 10 to the power of -13 seconds. This is a fraction of a trillionth of a second. It is a temporal coordinate so infinitesimally small that it mathematically, physically refuses to register on the macroscopic timeline of the human species. If you were to magically enlarge a single second until it spanned the entire duration of human history, from the very first primitive biological ancestors to the present day, the entire lifespan of a tau particle would still be over in a fraction of a heartbeat. It is a ghost that is violently, mechanically murdered before the universe even fully acknowledges that it was born. The terrifying, suffocating dread of this microscopic lifespan lies in its absolute, unyielding necessity. The tau particle is fundamentally unstable because it is a thermodynamic abomination. In the unrecordable, microscopic fractions of a second following the Big Bang, when the entire universe was a violently churning, hyperdense, and infinitely hot primordial soup, the heavy tau was a natural, highly abundant constituent of reality. The ambient energy of the cosmos was so catastrophically high that the crushing, hypermassive excitations of the tau field were perfectly, flawlessly sustained by the surrounding environment. But we no longer live in that roaring, high-energy furnace. We live in the cold, freezing, low-energy remnants of that explosion. The modern vacuum is a thermodynamic graveyard. The universe aggressively seeks the path of least resistance. It mathematically, relentlessly, demands the lowest possible energy state. Because the tau particle is so monstrously heavy, because it requires such an apocalyptic surge of concentrated kinetic energy just to drag its zero-dimensional coordinate through the suffocating molasses of the Higgs field, its existence represents a massive, localized peak in the thermodynamic ledger. The universe treats the tau particle as a catastrophic error in its accounting. It is a hyper-energetic spike that the underlying fabric of spacetime desperately, violently wants to flatten out. The second a tau particle is summoned into our low-energy vacuum, whether through the violent collision of cosmic rays in our atmospheric apple skin, or the heavily engineered kinetic bombardment of our terrestrial particle. Accelerators, the unyielding laws of physics, immediately initiate an absolute, reality-breaking deletion protocol. This is the ultimate, inescapable manifestation of a fleeting, meaningless physical existence. We arrogantly, delusionally believe that our lives have value because we persist. We build our towering concrete empires and record our deeply cherished personal memories because we assume that time is a medium that preserves our actions. But the tau particle aggressively, perfectly proves that the universe can and will unwrite its own most energetic creations in the blink of a subatomic eye. The tau is over 3,400 times heavier than the electron. It is a hypermassive titan of the quantum realm, and yet it is not granted even a single, unrecordable microsecond of stability. It is a violent, hypermassive glitch that is instantly, flawlessly corrected. To the tau particle, there is no such thing as a future. There is no such thing as a trajectory through space. Because it exists for such a fraction of a trillionth of a second, even if it is traveling at 99.9% the absolute speed of light, it can only physically traverse a distance of roughly 80 micrometers before it is violently, mechanically deleted. That is less than the width of a single human hair. The most hypermassive, hyper-energetic lepton in the known universe is biologically, structurally forbidden from even crossing the room. It is born in a violent flash of thermodynamic struggle. It desperately, frantically attempts to drag its crushing weight through the invisible Higgs molasses for a distance so microscopic it practically defies geometric description, and then it is instantly, flawlessly executed by the weak nuclear force. There is a profound, suffocating ontological horror in this brevity. If a particle that possesses such a staggering, reality-breaking physical mass can be so casually, instantly deleted by the universe, what does that say about the stability of your own rotting, heavily entangled biological existence? You only believe you are permanent because you are made of the lightweight, stable first generation of matter, the electrons and quarks that the universe, for reasons of pure, blind mathematical symmetry, has not yet found a reason to delete. You are a localized, low-energy anomaly that has been allowed to persist simply because you do not represent a significant enough thermodynamic spike to trigger the cosmic deletion protocol. You are not safe. You are merely insignificant enough to be ignored by the executioner. The tau particle is the heavy, suffocating reminder that the universe does not preserve what it creates. It is an unfeeling, blind mechanical process that aggressively, relentlessly prunes any excitation that dares to resist its baseline energy state. The tau exists as a fleeting, hypermassive ghost, a temporary wave of mathematical probability that crashes and vanishes in the freezing dark before it can ever truly touch the stars or influence the macro architecture of the cosmos. It is the ultimate proof that mass does not equal importance, and that energy does not equal permanence. As we prepare to observe the exact, unrecordable microsecond of the tau's destruction, you must painfully understand that we are not watching a part of the world. We are watching a violent, hypermassive rejection. The universe is actively spitting the tau out, violently shattering its crushing mass into lighter, more acceptable ghosts, and moving on as if the glitch never even occurred. You are staring at the absolute, unyielding definition of cosmic indifference. We have meticulously established the hypermassive, zero-dimensional, and fundamentally unstable nature of the tau particle, dragging your localized biological consciousness into a reality where substance is an illusion and mass is merely an agonizing friction against the invisible Higgs molasses. We have watched this thermodynamic abomination struggle to exist for a fraction of a trillionth of a second before the unyielding, cold mechanics of the cosmos initiate an absolute deletion protocol. But you must not delusionally hallucinate that this deletion is a peaceful, silent transition. The universe does not simply allow a hypermassive quantum glitch to quietly fade into the freezing dark. Reality is a ruthless, high-pressure accounting system, and when it decides to erase a heavy excitation from the tau field, the resulting process is an act of extreme subatomic violence. This is the cosmological execution. This is the moment the heavy tau rips itself apart, violently shattering its crushing energy into lighter, more acceptable ghosts that the vacuum of space is actually willing to tolerate. To forcefully force your sluggish, terrestrial neurological architecture to comprehend this execution, you must aggressively unwrite your macroscopic understanding of destruction. In your heavily sanitized, localized daily existence, you view the breaking of an object as a messy, external event. You drop a ceramic plate on the dense terrestrial crust, and it shatters into a collection of smaller, jagged pieces of the exact same material. The identity of the substance remains, but its geometric order is lost. But the tau particle is a fundamental lepton. It has no internal parts to break. It has no smaller gears to spill. Therefore, its destruction is not a mechanical failure. It is a profound, reality-breaking transformation of energy itself. The tau does not break, it decays. It is a localized, hypermassive peak in the quantum field that suddenly, violently collapses, bleeding its concentrated energy into other, entirely different invisible oceans. This apocalyptic transformation is mediated by the weak nuclear force, the unfeeling, blind executioner of the subatomic realm. The weak force is the only mechanism in the known universe capable of changing the very identity of a fundamental particle. It is the force responsible for the slow, agonizing radioactive rot of heavy elements, and it is the force that dictates the absolute, unrecordable microsecond of the tau's demise. When the deletion protocol is triggered, the hypermassive tau does not simply disappear. It violently vomits its staggering mass into a chaotic spray of lighter, more stable particles. Because the tau is over 3,400 times heavier than the electron, it possesses an incredible, terrifying amount of phase space for its decay. It can shatter itself in dozens of different ways, a luxury of destruction that lighter particles can only dream of. In the majority of these violent events, the heavy tau rips itself open to produce a W boson, a hypermassive, short-lived carrier of the weak force that acts as the primary tool of the execution. This boson instantly, violently shatters further, vomiting out a high-energy electron or its slightly heavier cousin, the muon. But even as the crushing weight of the tau is converted into these lighter, more acceptable ripples, the universe demands a hidden, ghostly tax to balance the mathematical ledger of reality. To preserve the sacred, unyielding symmetries of lepton number and quantum spin, the decaying tau must also spit out a tau neutrino, and if it decays into an electron, it must also vomit an electron antineutrino. This is not a peaceful redistribution of resources. It is a violent, hyper-energetic spray of subatomic shrapnel, a localized thermodynamic explosion occurring in a fraction of a trillionth of a second. The true, suffocating dread of this cosmological deletion lies in the terrifying, ghostly nature of the shrapnel. The electrons and muons produced in the decay are familiar charged entities that will eventually interact with the electromagnetic fields of our terrestrial world. But the neutrinos, specifically the tau neutrino, are the ultimate manifestations of cosmic indifference. These are the most elusive, reality-breaking ghosts in the history of physics. They possess almost zero mass, they carry no electric charge, and they absolutely, fundamentally refuse to interact with the strong nuclear force or the electromagnetic field. They are the invisible, unfeeling waste products of the tau's execution. As the heavy tau rips itself apart, these neutrinos are violently expelled at velocities so closely approaching the absolute speed of light that the concept of time practically ceases to exist for them. They scream away from the site of the execution, instantly plunging into the freezing dark of the vacuum. And because they possess such a microscopic, practically non-existent cross-section for interaction, the entire macroscopic world of human history is nothing more than a transparent, empty ghost to them. Right now, as you sit in your heavily constructed concrete shelters, millions of neutrinos, produced by the violent decay of heavy particles in the upper atmosphere, or the roaring thermonuclear furnaces of the dying stars, are screaming directly through your biological meat machine. They are punching through your skull, through your heart, and through the dense, rocky continental crust of the Earth at hundreds of thousands of miles per second. They pass flawlessly through the entire diameter of our planet without slowing down, without losing a single fraction of their kinetic energy, and without ever interacting with a single atom of your physical reality. This is the ultimate, inescapable horror of the tau's legacy. The hypermassive particle that we have spent billions of terrestrial dollars and decades of highly specialized engineering to summon into existence, the monster whose crushing weight defines the very limits of our quantum fields, bleeds its entire existence into invisible ghosts that do not even acknowledge our world. The staggering mass of the tau is not recycled to build stable atoms or to power your localized digital empires. It is shattered and thrown away. It is converted into a spray of ghostly radiation that vanishes into the infinite, expanding dark, forever isolated from the macroscopic world. The universe does not care about the energy it spent forging the tau. It simply wants the glitch gone. It is a process of absolute, unfeeling thermodynamic disposal. When the tau decays, it leaves nothing behind. There is no physical residue. There is no microscopic corpse. The localized ripple in the tau field is perfectly, flawlessly flattened back to its zero-point baseline. The energy has been redistributed, the accounting has been balanced, and the unyielding timeline of causality moves forward as if the hypermassive abomination never even occurred. You are staring at the absolute terrifying efficiency of the cosmic executioner. The universe is a high-pressure machine that creates hypermassive, chaotic monsters just to violently, instantly rip them apart and scatter their remains as invisible ghosts into a void that will never, ever look back. We are desperately, pathetically searching for meaning in the subatomic architecture, hoping to find a hint of biological purpose or a trace of structural permanence. But all we find is a violent, hyper-energetic slaughterhouse that aggressively deletes its most massive creations in a heartbeat, leaving us to drift blindly in a universe made of temporary ripples and disappearing ghosts. We have violently, meticulously stripped away the macroscopic illusion of physical substance, forcing your deeply fragile biological consciousness to confront the zero-dimensional, hypermassive anomaly of the tau particle. We have watched it struggle to exist for a fraction of a trillionth of a second before the unyielding mechanics of the Higgs field and the weak nuclear force initiate a cosmological execution, shattering its crushing weight into invisible, ghostly shrapnel that screams into the infinite dark. But as we stand amidst the subatomic wreckage of this hyper-energetic slaughterhouse, a far more suffocating, existential dread begins to saturate the freezing vacuum. We must forcefully ask the ultimate, reality-breaking question that has paralyzed the greatest terrestrial minds for decades. Why does the Tao even exist? Why did the unfeeling architecture of the cosmos bother to forge such a monstrous, redundant, and violently unstable thermodynamic abomination in the first place? This is the generational mystery. This is the absolute, unyielding proof that the universe is not an elegant, purposefully designed nursery, but a chaotic and relentlessly indifferent machine that operates entirely outside the microscopic requirements of human biology. To forcefully force your sluggish, terrestrial neurological architecture to comprehend this mystery, you must aggressively unwrite your deeply ingrained need for cosmic efficiency. In your heavily sanitized, localized daily existence, you perceive the world through the lens of functional design. You look at the stable, lightweight first generation of matter, the electrons that power your heart, and the up and down quarks that construct the nuclei of your atoms, and you hallucinate a sense of perfect, minimalist harmony. These specific particles are the absolute, leanest building blocks required to facilitate the complex chemical biology of your flesh and the dense continental crust of your rotting planetary rock. If the universe consisted only of this first generation, the macroscopic diorama of human history would still function flawlessly. There is absolutely no chemical, biological, or structural necessity for anything heavier. For all conceivable intents of human survival, the first generation is the only generation that matters. And yet, as we violently probed the underlying fabric of space-time with our heavily engineered particle accelerators, we discovered that the universe is not a minimalist. It is an obsessive, hyperactive duplicator. The cosmos did not just create the electron, it created the muon, a particle over 200 times heavier, and then it created the tau, a monster 3,400 times heavier. It did not just create the up and down quarks, it created the charm, the strange, the top and the bottom quarks, each progressively more massive, each increasingly unstable, and each utterly lethal to the stable structures of our terrestrial reality. These are the three generations of matter. They are identical in every quantum parameter charge, spin, and interaction, differing only in their staggering, crushing physical mass. When the second generation, the muon, was first discovered in the mid-20th century, the celebrated physicist Rabi famously, desperately asked, "Who ordered that?" It was a cry of profound scientific frustration against a universe that refused to be elegant. That question has only grown more suffocating and more terrifying with the discovery of the Tao. In a purposeful, intelligently designed universe, redundancy is a failure. But in the cold, unfeeling vocabulary of quantum field theory, the Tau particle is not a failure. It is a fundamental, unyielding requirement of the mathematical symmetries that govern the vacuum. The universe did not create the Tau to serve you. It did not create the heavy generations to build your concrete cities or to sustain your fragile breathing. It created them because the foundational algebraic symmetries of the Big Bang blindly, mechanically demanded 3 copies of every fundamental field. The true, paralyzing dread of this mystery is the absolute realization that the architecture of reality was definitively not tailored for human life. We are biologically, structurally conditioned to believe that we are the protagonists of the cosmic narrative. We look at the stars, and we delusionally believe that the laws of physics were tuned specifically to allow us to exist. But the existence of the hypermassive, violently unstable tau particle aggressively proves that we are a microscopic side effect of a much larger, much heavier, and much more chaotic mechanical process. The universe is filled with terrifying, heavy mechanics that serve absolutely no purpose to our macroscopic survival. The vast majority of the matter field excitations in the cosmos are hypermassive ghosts that exist for a fraction of a nanometer and then violently vanish, never forming a single atom, never participating in a single chemical reaction, and never witnessing a single second of human history. We are living in a house built by a mad architect who constructed thousands of miles of heavy, reinforced lead piping and high-voltage electrical grids hidden deep within the walls, all of which are completely unnecessary to the functioning of our small, localized living room. We only perceive the lightweight, stable first generation because that is the only part of the machine that doesn't instantly kill us. We are an accidental, low-energy biological anomaly clinging to the absolute, fraying outer edge of a hyper-energetic thermodynamic storm. The tau particle is the heavy, suffocating proof that the universe is redundant on a scale that defies logical processing. It proves that the cosmos is a high-pressure, chaotic system that churns out hypermassive abominations simply because the equations allow it. There is a profound, reality-breaking indifference in this redundancy. The universe spent a staggering, mind-bending amount of primordial energy forging the tau field, creating a medium that can support excitations thousands of times heavier than the building blocks of our bodies, only for that field to remain almost entirely empty and useless in the modern, low-energy vacuum. It is a cosmic waste of unimaginable proportions. It suggests that our stable, lightweight world is not the main event of the universe, but a rare, fragile, and temporary exception. We are the lightweight debris floating on the surface of an infinitely deep, hypermassive ocean that we are only now beginning to map. As we forcefully confront the generational mystery, we are forced to discard the last remaining shreds of our anthropocentric hubris. The tau particle is the absolute executioner of the idea that the universe is fine-tuned for us. It is fine-tuned for itself. It is fine-tuned for a set of abstract, unfeeling mathematical symmetries that happen to produce a few stable, lightweight particles as a secondary consequence of their own internal logic. We are not the masters of the machine. We are the microscopic, hallucinating mold growing on the gears. The universe is a chaotic, redundant slaughterhouse that creates hypermassive, useless monsters in the dark, and it will continue to do so long after our lightweight, stable biology has been flawlessly deleted from the timeline. The tau particle is the heavy, silent witness to our absolute cosmic insignificance. It is the redundant ghost in the machine, and its existence is the ultimate, unyielding proof that the cosmos is a terrifying, blind mechanical process that does not and will never know we were here. We have finally reached the absolute, unyielding terminus of our subatomic execution. We have violently, meticulously stripped away every single layer of your deeply ingrained macroscopic comfort, forcing your sluggish terrestrial neurological architecture to descend from the familiar, solid world of hands and concrete cities into the freezing, reality-breaking abyss of the quantum realm. We have used the hypermassive, violently unstable thermodynamic abomination known as the tau particle to systematically, ruthlessly dismantle the most deeply toxic biological lie your species has ever clung to, the absolute illusion of physical substance. You began this journey as a hallucinating meat machine that inherently, deeply believed in the billiard ball delusion. You looked at the universe as a collection of hard, indestructible objects stacked together in an empty box, and you viewed yourself as a solid, permanent protagonist in a tangible cosmic narrative. But the cold, unfeeling mathematics of the tau lepton have aggressively, permanently unwritten that fantasy. Through the lens of the tau, we have been forced to confront the impossible geometry of the zero-dimensional point particle. We have watched the comforting concept of stuff evaporate, replaced by a hypermassive ghost that possesses a crushing physical weight over 3,400 times that of an electron, while simultaneously occupying absolutely, flawlessly zero physical volume. We have seen that mass is not a possession, but an agonizing, continuous friction against the invisible, suffocating molasses of the Higgs field. We have witnessed the tau's existence as a fleeting, meaningless glitch, a wave of mathematical probability that crashes and vanishes in a fraction of a trillionth of a second before it can ever truly register on the timeline of human history. We have stared into the generational mystery, realizing that the universe is a chaotic, redundant slaughterhouse that forge heavy, useless mechanics that serve absolutely no purpose to our microscopic, macroscopic survival. Now, as we stand at the absolute edge of this existential void, we must forcefully synthesize these horrifying realizations into a single, unyielding truth. The tau particle does not merely represent a niche corner of high-energy physics. It is the absolute executioner of our understanding of reality. It proves, with mechanical certainty, that the solid world we desperately, pathetically cling to is a strictly localized optical illusion. There is no such thing as matter in the way your primitive biological brain wants to define it. The universe is not a physical place. It is a sprawling, violently churning mathematical ledger. It is a highly organized, desperately unstable arrangement of invisible, omnipresent quantum fields that are in a state of continuous, violent agitation. You look at your heavily entangled biological body, and you feel the weight of your own existence. But you must now painfully accept that you are not made of solid objects. You are constructed entirely out of violently vibrating mathematical ghosts, suspended in an ocean of absolute, freezing nothingness. Every single atom in your flesh is a localized, temporary spike of energy in an invisible fluid that spans the infinite dark. Your sensation of physical resistance, the feeling of the heavy terrestrial crust beneath your feet, and the very air you desperately breathe are nothing more than the mathematical interactions of zero-dimensional coordinates aggressively forbidding their properties from overlapping. You are a walking, breathing weather pattern of quantum excitations, a highly complex but ultimately meaningless ripple in a cosmic sea that is fundamentally empty. This is the crushing weight of nothingness. It is the realization that the foundation of our reality is not rock, but math. It is the understanding that the universe did not need to use physical stuff to build galaxies, stars, and human civilizations. It simply used the unyielding laws of probability and the violent friction of invisible fields. We are the accidental byproduct of a machine that creates hypermassive monsters and ghostly shrapnel with absolute indifference. The tau particle, in its brief and violent life, serves as the ultimate mirror for our own existence. It is heavy, it is energetic, it is real, and yet it is fundamentally composed of nothing, and it is instantly deleted by the very laws that allowed it to be born. We must discard the last remaining shreds of our anthropocentric hubris. We are not the masters of a material world. We are localized glitches in a mathematical void. We are a collection of lightweight, stable particles that have been allowed to persist simply because we represent a low-energy state that the universe has not yet found a mechanical reason to delete. But the heavy, chaotic shadow of the Tau proves that the deletion protocol is always there, lurking in the background energy of the vacuum, waiting for the next fluctuation to trigger the cosmological execution. Does the realization that you are fundamentally composed of vibrating mathematical ghosts make you feel physically hollow, or does the terrifying complexity of these invisible quantum fields make your localized biological existence profoundly beautiful? We are the only part of this unfeeling machine that possesses the neurological capacity to feel the dread of its own nothingness. We are the vacuum waking up and realizing it is empty. Perhaps that realization is the only thing that is truly solid in an otherwise ghostly universe. Let's discuss the architecture of nothingness below. This has been the Still Science Lab. We have pushed your perception to the absolute limit of the subatomic abyss, and we have left you there to drift in the freezing dark. You may go back to your macroscopic life now. You may touch your solid tables and walk on your solid ground, but you will do so knowing that it is all a lie. You will do so knowing that you are a ripple in an invisible ocean and that the Tau is waiting in the fields. Good night, and we will violently shatter another illusion together in the next video.